Good afternoon. Welcome. I'm going to give folks just a couple minutes to trickle in. If you've joined us before for our webinars, you know that we love to know where people are calling in from. So I'll start. Erin Gwill calling in from Atlanta, Georgia.
You want me to go next, Erin?
Yeah.
Lisa Delfini calling in from Trevi Therapeutics in New Haven, Connecticut.
Psyched to have Lisa on the pod today. Oh, I see Sarasota, Florida, Charlotte, North Carolina. This is some good Southeast representation, which we don't always get in the biopharma world. All right, I'm gonna give a minute or two and then we'll get started. Really excited about lots of topics today. I am going to facilitate the discussion, but I think as always, we love when people ask questions. Please feel free to drop questions in the chat. Lisa has a lot of wisdom to share with us, and I think what we have consistently heard from this industry is you want to hear from peers, you want to hear from folks who know what they're doing, and that's why we have Lisa on the pod today. So definitely encouraging folks to ask as many questions as possible. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. The thinking kind of today is Lisa and I will have a discussion. I'm going to introduce Lisa, and then we can jump in. Again, please feel free to ask anything. I'm Erin Warner-Gwill. I'm the president and COO of Auxilius. I've been around since the beginning. Fellow finance professional like I have here in Lisa. And I oversee kind of everything on the commercial side of Auxilius. I'm joined by Lisa Delfini. She's the CFO of Trevi. We are very excited to have her here. In terms of background, I'm going to give a bit, and then Lisa, please add color. You've been the CFO of Trevi since 2021. Prior to that, you were financial accounting and advisory services partner at Marcum LLP, specializing in providing services to companies in the life sciences and tech industries. You've held senior roles at GE, including global controller for the GE Corporate Technical Center of Excellence. And lastly, spent 16 years at Deloitte, becoming client service partner by the end of your tenure there. Anything I'm missing?
Nope, that's about it. Okay. That's it. You captured it.
It's an impressive track record, and I think we'll dig into this a little bit more, but definitely want to hear what you think about kind of biotechs relative to some of the industries you worked in. In terms of Trevi, I think it's important, and we're going to talk a little bit about kind of the evolution of Trevi Therapeutics. So a little bit of background there. Trevi Therapeutics is a clinical stage biopharmaceutical company based in New Haven, Connecticut, developing a therapy for chronic cough in patients with pulmonary fibrosis and refractory chronic cough. I think all of us read endpoints and follow the headlines. Super exciting recent developments. Trevi recently announced positive top-line results from its phase 2B trial, and then recently closed an offering with proceeds of approximately $115 million. And we'll talk through both of those developments because there's obviously a lot to learn from Lisa in that context. So I think with that, Lisa, from your perspective, I think let's start with kind of the industries that you've worked with. What sets, biotech, biopharma apart from a kind of finance perspective?
Yeah. I would say that all of my roles have been sort of fast moving. Like they've all been very sort of fast paced. There's always a lot of change going on no matter where I've been. But I think the speed at which biopharma, life sciences and biotech companies have to just completely pivot is sometimes mind-blowing. Like we joke around that you sort of are on this roller coaster and you can be on the highest of highs one day and the lowest of lows the next, and you have to be constantly pivoting for that. When I first joined the company, it was really a tough time to raise capital, as well as a tough time because we were just coming off of COVID and all clinical trials were getting delayed. Cash was running out for many, many companies. It was a super challenging time. And we were close to not existing for a while. And then we read out positive data and we were able to raise $50 million. And that really sort of just changed the whole trajectory of the company. And so to live through that down and then raising, we raised 100, like you said, we raised 115 just a couple of weeks ago. We also raised 50 million in December. So to sort of have to navigate that pivot and everything that goes with it, right? In 2021, we were not hiring anybody because we were concerned, and now we're sort of completely in a different direction because we're preparing for the next phase of expansion. So I would say that's been the biggest difference in terms of just a finance role in biotech versus the other roles that I've had.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think you need to have an open mind and be flexible and
exactly
understand that every day is going to be different. That makes sense. I think you and I have talked before, and I think this is sort of the prevailing thought, is that there are different flavors of CFO, right? You have your came from Wall Street investment banking and first job in the real world, financial CFO, maybe the strategic CFO, operational CFO. How do you think about kind of the your flavor of CFO? Where do you see that you kind of excel, and how does that inform your priorities from a day-to-day?
Yeah, so my background is not sort of from the investment banking, right? I came from the sort of auditor, financial services, that kind of thing. I did do roles in industry before I came, and part of my role at GE was related to the healthcare division at GE. So my background is more on that side, and that was a big learning curve for me because coming into this role, I had to get used to meeting with investors all the time and sort of, making sure that our messaging, our whole entire team does this, but our messaging is appropriate for our activities and what sort of investors are interested in hearing about the company. So that whole investor facing piece is very different from the background that I came from. Also, the focus on the patient, I think, is, different. And being at Trevi is very meaningful for me because my mother passed away from pulmonary fibrosis about 1.5 years ago. And she had the chronic cough that goes along with it. So for me, it's been very easy to sort of stay very connected to that patient journey. As I was learning more about our development pathway, it was very consistent with what I was seeing my mother go through. So it's been very, very, like I said, sort of enriching for me, being part of that journey. But we also, like my mom, when she was still alive and she was ill, she came and spoke to the whole Trevi team about the patient journey. And so keeping all of our people connected to the voice of the patient is important for the company too.
I think that's an incredible and powerful message. And I think we've heard that consistently. I think this is one of the reasons, just as an aside, it's always been fascinating and amazing to me as we talk to, the finance and accounting teams across the biotech sector who know more about science than I think that they ever imagined they would. And it's so great to keep kind of that science and that patient at the core. I really appreciate you sharing that. Just in you've outlined the financial trajectory. There's obviously a lot of exciting things going on. It'd be interesting to just hear from your perspective, what are your biggest priorities or initiatives that your team is focused on at Trevi today?
Yeah. I would say there's really three of them. Ensuring sort of that the company is funded, right? So obviously when we do these financings, first of all, there's a lot of preparation to go into, when we're ready to do a financing, when the market is right, and investor targeting and preparation for all of that. And then when we're actually in the middle of a deal, right, it's very sort of all consuming of my department because there's just a lot of transactional type stuff to get through. So that's a big priority from when it's very active. Then we need to also ensure that the clinical development team has the financial information that they need, right, to make decisions, because that's really the lifeblood of the company, right? They're developing the drug. If they don't successfully develop the drug, then none of us have a job here anymore. So that's sort of our next priority, is making sure they have the right information. And then there's the whole compliance side of things, right? The SEC filings, the financial statements, internal controls, which is actually a big focus for me right now, because we are, there's a potential that we might be SOX 404B compliant, which is, a significant exercise for a smaller company. So those are sort of the three areas where I see us mainly focusing.
I do want to, so those are three great priorities and actually opportunities for discussion. I find the second point so interesting, Lisa. You mentioned that you feel like it's your job to help the rest of the clinical development team understand what's going on from a financial perspective. I think that we see disparity here across the industry, where I'd argue that sometimes finance and accounting teams get so focused on point number 3.
Yes.
Like getting the financial statement. It's important, right? The accuracy, the completeness, all of that, incredibly important, ensuring that there's compliance. But this notion that you are a business partner back to the clinical team and helping them make strategic decisions is such an important one. And I think that truly, if there's real, cooperative dynamics between the functions, I imagine it makes it easier to get the expense estimates at the end of the month.
Yes. Well, like I said, we try to be as supportive as we can. We actually have changed our structure a little bit too, where we moved a person who was on my finance team actually into the R&D team, so that she can help them with some of the things that we were sort of always asking them about, and was difficult for them to, because they don't sort of speak accrual language, right? Sometimes it's difficult for them to respond to our questions, especially if we don't say them in a way that they really understand what we're asking for. So that has really been a game changer. That person also does a lot of working with contracts with the clinical development team, just because there's a huge number of contracts that you're always, in the process of, executing. And typically that was sort of executed by the ClinOps team, but having a person with a financial background who can help sort of crunch the numbers and make sure that the estimates are reasonable, and do all that sort of triaging before it gets so far down the road that it's hard to go backwards is really super helpful. So that's one of the ways that we try to help, but we try to help in every way. I really sort of am always impressing upon my team, like, we've got to make life easy for these people, because I think of their life as much harder than us. We talk about this a lot too. Like, at least we have sort of GAAP and we have the SEC, and there's a lot of guidance out there, but the clinical development team, right, they're running trials on drugs that, while there's a lot of regulatory guidance from the FDA, you don't know how your drug's going to behave. So there's no gap for how to develop a drug, right? So they're dealing with a lot more uncertainty than we are. But it is very, very difficult to be focused like that, because to your point, it's so important that we do get the financial side right for a number of reasons. It's hard to stay focused that way, but we try.
Yeah, I love that. I love that point. Just now, I think first thing you mentioned, obviously, is funding and runway and dealing with the market. I want to shift into your recent raise. I think, we participated in a lot of industry events, and we're certainly hearing that 2025 is, and we're seeing 2025 is bringing capital scarcity. And so, and yet you guys just had a significant raise in the middle of that, and that's awesome. So congratulations. I think just for the folks who have joined us, it'd be great to hear what are the kind of key factors that you attribute to the success of that raise?
Yeah. So it's difficult because I feel for the rest of the industry, right? Like all those folks who are out there trying to get deals done that can't get deals done, because I've heard that there are a lot of them out there. I think there's a lot of factors that go into having a successful fundraise. So much of it, though, these days especially, like gone are the days where investors are willing to take a flyer on something that is super, 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 I guess, early in its development. And, we're lucky in the sense that we're a little bit further along, right? We're in phase 2 of our clinical trials. So at least we have some, a lot of preclinical work, a lot of phase 1 work that gives investors comfort that the drug works. But, we talk about things in the sense that you've got to have a drug that works. You've got to have a disciplined team, right? We talked a little bit earlier about how, we consider ourselves very capital efficient. And we heard that a lot from our investors when we were out, talking to investors about the deal, that how they were excited by the fact that we are very capital efficient, but also a team that knows how to run clinical trials and in a very disciplined way, right? Because trials can go wrong, even though the drug works, if the clinical team is not really watching the trial the way they need to. So it's truly a cross-functional effort, right? So you need to have a drug that works, a disciplined team in terms of spending money, and in terms of, making sure that the trial is moving along the way it needs to be. And then you also need to have a team that can articulate the message in a way that investors get it and understand it. And that's, we have a chief commercial officer who articulates, the reimbursement message and the insurance, how all that's going to work once we get approved. And, our CEO goes to a lot of medical conferences along with our chief development officer. And she really listens so carefully to the key opinion leaders in the space, the investigators and the doctors who are out there treating patients. And she takes those messages and sort of feeds them back to investors. And so those 3 things, a drug that works, a disciplined team, and an ability to articulate the message and the value proposition and what you're seeing with KOLs, that's what we sort of talk about as the secret sauce. I also talked a little bit earlier about targeting. We do spend a lot of time, thinking through. We work with our banks to identify, what are the funds that, are active in investing in companies like us. And then we try to, try to get meetings with them, try to get introductions to those funds. And it's a very structured process. And we're always sort of looking a year ahead. Like, what are the investors that we need to meet? It sort of starts with our planning for the JP Morgan conference, or the conference that we attend at the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference. We don't go to the actual JP Morgan conference, but it seems to sort of start there, where we say, okay, what do we need to do in the next 12 months? Who are the investors that we need to meet with? Let's start with trying to get a meeting with them at JP Morgan. And then if we don't get a meeting with them there, we're continually trying to get meetings with them during the year at different conferences. So having that kind of structured process, I think it makes it so that when you read out the data, there are investors that have been doing work and are ready to invest, rather than starting at that point, right? So there's a lot of planning that goes into that as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point for the industry. I'm going to hold for now on capital efficiency because I love that topic, and we'll talk about that a bit. I think you talked about targeting investors. Are you guys seeing investor behavior changing in 2025?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is that in hearing is that investors are really focused on near-term data readouts, right? So, I always like to say we're a little bit lucky and a little bit good, right? Because we've had essentially 4 clinical readouts in the last 9 months. And because we're at that phase 2, completing a phase 2B trial, it's a compelling time right now for investors. I just think the markets are such that, like I said earlier, I think investors are having trouble investing in things that are earlier, and that all ties into the patent cliffs that are happening at big pharma and all of that. But I think that's one of the biggest trends. So again, we're a little bit lucky from that perspective.
Shifting a little bit, but still staying kind of on the market, big topic on everyone's mind in 2025, obviously, is the regulatory piece. There's a lot of headlines out there. How is this shaping your job as CFO, and what is your org focused on as a result? How are you de-risking?
Yeah. So our organization, obviously, we have not seen a delay in, our interactions with the FDA so far. We have, had some interactions in the last sort of 6 months or so, and we haven't seen any delays. So that's good news for us. We have, senior vice president of regulatory who is sort of really keeping her finger on the pulse of what's going on there and trying to figure out sort of what's going on in the division that is responsible for ultimately approving our drug, and really stay on top of it. But I would say we haven't seen that much impact of it. I think from a potential delay perspective, I think that one thing that investors are interested in is making sure that you have a little extra runway in terms of overhead after sort of your next clinical trial readout, so that if there is a delay, really for that reason or for other reasons too, right? There can be delays for lots of different reasons, that you're not sort of in a position where you're reading out data like with your last dollar in the bank, right? So we saw, we had good results in our latest financing of being able to get that extra runway in case of any delays. So,
yep, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it is encouraging to hear that you have not had delays in your interaction, just because I think I think everyone's pretty curious about that piece. Okay, so I'm going to switch gears, and I've really appreciated the insights on the market. Obviously, a topic near and dear to our hearts over here at Auxilius. I thought this was fascinating. You told us that when you joined Trevi was running on QuickBooks, which is, I've actually heard that if someone is very adept at QuickBooks, you can make that work as a public company. But generally, we see that there is a tech transformation. Since then, you've led a broad financial transformation that has included implementing Netsuite, FloQast, Cube, and then obviously Auxilius. I'd love to understand your overarching impetus for this transformation and kind of specifically the timing.
Yeah. So to be honest, I wouldn't say that I felt like in 2021 that we were embarking on a finance transformation. I think it just sort of came sort of organically, really. I mean, we knew that the first order of business was that we had to get off of QuickBooks and get on to something that had a much more automated control environment. So that was sort of the first thing that we tackled. And then little by little, we just started sort of learning of different systems that could help either make us more efficient or improve our control environment. And my team would come to me and say, I think we should implement Auxilius, or I think we should implement FloQast to improve our internal controls. And I would say, yes, we should do that. Yes, we should do that. Yes, we should do that. And we've done even more than that too. We've also implemented a new stock option system called OptionTrax. Now we just this year implemented optical character recognition in our invoice entry process to sort of automate our invoice entry process. So yes, we definitely have done a transformation, but I feel like we just sort of waded into it. And then as we became aware of systems that could help us, we just kept doing it. Like I said, either because it would make us more efficient or because it would improve our internal controls.
That makes a lot of sense. I guess one of the things that we hear, right, is, and especially in a, I think, okay, so clinical development gets all the money, and they should, right? We know that's the lifeblood of the organization. And so finance and accounting tends to be kind of resource constrained teams. One of the things that I think is really interesting with finance transformations, and as CFOs and controllers are making decisions around tech implementations, is the trade-off between the time it will take to implement and adopt a technology versus going with the status quo.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder how you think about that trade-off in general. You can speak about it relative to Auxilius if there's anything, but I think it's something that we hear quite a bit in the industry.
Yeah, so with respect to Auxilius, I guess maybe I'll just start there. We had become frustrated with the level of reporting that we were getting from our CRO, and it had actually led to the identification of some errors, and maybe those errors could have been prevented, but it would have required a lot more oversight of us to how the CRO was putting together their investigator fees charges for us. And so we were considering actually hiring another person and to build a whole investigator fee waterfall from scratch and have that person, that would be almost their entire job. And then we became aware of Auxilius, and Auxilius was less expensive than doing that. And we felt like, why start from scratch? You might as well start with something that somebody has built, especially when it's specifically for the exact purpose that you're looking for. It's going to be better than sort of bringing somebody in to start from scratch. So that was really the decision making for Auxilius. And I don't know, I feel like the implementation time really for all these packages or all these software platforms that we've implemented, maybe other than NetSuite, but we do tend to pick ones that are on the easier side to implement, partially because we don't now we're starting to build an internal IT team, but for a long time we didn't have any internal IT. So it was very difficult to pick something that's super complicated from an IT perspective. So yeah, I mean, NetSuite was probably our most complicated implementation. I think that all the rest of these things that we've implemented, while there are improvements that I think we probably could have made along the way to how we implemented them, I don't feel like the implementation time held us back at all. If anything, I feel like these platforms helped us to move faster than if we had to build this stuff on our own, or in the old days where you had your own software on a server. And, I think the whole software as a service is a much more, it's just an easier way to implement and to be able to bring these technologies in quickly.
Yep. Okay. That makes a ton of sense. I think I'd love to shift gears because I will say we, across kind of the 85 customers that Auxilius serves, we certainly see a difference in awareness and or involvement from the C-suite. And so I'd love to understand from your perspective, what's your sort of level of when you think about clinical financial management, what is your level of engagement? How sort of granular do you need to get? What do you expect your teams to be doing? Would love just kind of your perspective on the CFO's role, what visibility you need, and then what you think good looks like.
Yeah, so I am actually very involved with Auxilius from multiple different perspectives. We talked about before sort of the different CFOs and the different types of CFOs. And I do come from one, I come from a more sort of accounting, sort of finance background than that whole sort of investment banking background. So, I think every CFO sort of reaches an agreement with their CEO about sort of what is their role to play in the organization. And my role is very, very firmly to bring all of my, experience to bear and to be pitching in and helping my team with things like forecasting and SOX 404B compliance and getting our financial statements correct. So I am really sort of always concentrating on those things in addition to sort of being involved in the investor interactions. I think that Auxilius and really all of the tools that we've implemented have enabled us to do a better job of forecasting, which goes into, right, our capital raising activities and all that, because our Netsuite and Auxilius tool feed into our forecasting tool. You mentioned Cube before, that's what we're using. So yeah, I mean, I'm working with our team every day to make sure that Auxilius, that both our financial statements and our financial forecasts are, as accurate as they can be, and we're leveraging these tools.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's what I've heard from finance leaders across the industry, and going back to kind of investor sentiment, right? They want to know that you have 12 months of runway after the readout, but it also means that they need confidence in your ability to forecast, right? Yeah. So the like how much runway is going to need to be is very much based on the inputs to your forecast model. So I think that's a great point. I wanted to talk a little bit about something else you brought up. And this is going to be leading the witness, right? Because we talked a lot about, or you mentioned capital efficiency as a driver for like access to investment. Trevi has recently used the Auxilius Investigator Reconciliation tool for the first time. So Lisa, I was hoping you could share kind of the decision to do that. And then what that's sort of helped in terms of how that trickles down to the bottom line.
Yeah. So the reason we decided to do it was because we had sort of done a, so maybe I'll call it an abbreviated version of the investigator reconciliation process on our own before we implemented Auxilius, and we had found duplicate payments when we did our own on a previous trial. So we knew that there was a high likelihood that we'd have, some hits in terms of some duplicate payments. I think that, the Auxilius tool sort of takes it a step further and finds, inappropriate payments or payments that aren't, consistent with the contract and things like that. And we just didn't have the capabilities to do that with our internal team. So like I said, we knew we'd probably find something, and or that Auxilius would probably find something, and that is what happened. We decided to use the tool, and we found a significantly greater benefit than the tool cost us. And like we've been talking about, our perspective is always every dollar that can go towards the science needs to go towards the science, because that's what we're all here for. So to be able to redeploy that money back to the science is what we're here for. That's our whole goal.
Great. I loved that story, and I love that that's on your radar as CFO. And then B, that Auxilius was able to help. And I think we've talked about it a little bit. And this is just an aside. And I think one of the reasons that investigator reconciliation has been very interesting across the industry is that not out of malice, but I think the CRO and payments have gone not unchecked, but there is just so much data. And so just having the ability to confirm and take a second look in an automated fashion, hopefully will help drive not only transparency, but eventually kind of impact to bottom line. Awesome. And then I think one kind of last question just on the Auxilius front, like you mentioned kind of impetus to buy as a decision between, do I hire another FTE or do I onboard software? I'd argue that when you guys bought Auxilius, the category of, clinical trial accruals and or software that was quite point solution focused in a highly regulated industry, right? This is, certainly something that's going to hit your financial statements. What got you comfortable, like as kind of an earlier adopter in this category of software?
What got us comfortable? I mean, one big thing is just that this is our most significant risk, right? Our clinical trial accruals are our most significant risk. It's our, critical accounting matter that our auditors talk about in their opinion. So I think that, obviously was a big driver. I think the other thing was just when we did the demos of the product and we saw, again, it's such a niche product. It's built for exactly what we need to do. And my team was doing demos and seeing, oh yeah, it has a step for, it's got the capabilities we need for direct expenses. It has the capabilities we need for pass-through expenses. It has the capabilities we need for investigator fees. Pulling that information from the EDC data that's coming through the trial and being able to accrue for it when the expenses are actually incurred. Like that was one of our biggest issues, was that the CROs, there was such a significant lag between when we knew that patient visits and procedures had occurred, but we're not getting bills for 4, 5, 6, 7 months after they had happened. And no matter how hard we tried to impress upon our CRO that we needed things we needed it to accrue for things when they happened, it just didn't seem to be part of their DNA. So when we did the demos and saw exactly that it did exactly what we needed, I think that's what gave us a lot of comfort.
Great. Yeah. And I know you mentioned earlier that you might be subject to 404B here in the next several months. I think still a question mark. How do you see, and maybe this is better suited for your team, although I think you probably have an answer. How do you see Auxilius factoring into like being able to report out, being able to kind of meet the control thresholds that are coming your way?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it probably starts with the SOC ones. I don't know if they have a new name. The name changes, so there's built-in controls that Auxilius is able to, give us an opinion on. Then, we're documenting also our complementary controls with respect to that. So Auxilius just becomes another tool that's, that we have to get our auditors comfortable with. But I think that the automation that's happening in Auxilius, I tell our auditors all the time, like, this is the best in class way to do these accruals. Like, if we could just take the information that we get from the CRO and book accruals based on that, but we know that it wouldn't be accurate that way. So this package is sort of a best in class way to be able to get the data as accurate as we possibly can. So I see it as really enhancing our control environment.
Okay, great. Yeah, that makes sense. And I feel like you get to sort of double click on that because you have the background. So I think we've talked about market, we've talked about tool stack. I think we are pretty close to time. I'm going to throw you a total curveball and kind of the last thing, because I found it such a fascinating point. And I think a lot of the folks that have joined today are probably in that accounting manager, controller position. When you think about the skills required to go from, I'm just, preparing the entry or the workbook at the end of the month up to that path of CFO, one of the critical things that you mentioned earlier in terms of fundraise is that communication and the ability to message and think strategically about positioning your business. My question for you is, as you're thinking about giving advice to the like accounting managers and controllers of the world that could potentially want to get on that CFO track, what are the skills they should be honing? What opportunities should they be taking advantage of in their current role that will position them well for that trajectory?
Yeah, I think one of the big things is to look for opportunities to present, because like I said, you're always presenting to investors in both formal and informal settings. And even though they want to hear a lot, from the development team and the CEO and all that kind of stuff, you have to be ready at any given moment to sort of step in and be able to deliver the same presentation. And that is something that I did earlier in my career. When I was with Deloitte, I did a lot of presenting at trainings and things like that. When I was at GE, I did presenting at trainings too, and presenting to the business units and things like that. So definitely look for opportunities to present, because it gets you just starting to think about that aspect of the business. And then be curious, I think, about things that are outside of the finance department, right? Like, you can't really be strategic if all you're ever thinking about is, account recs. Like, you have to be curious about what's going on in the business. So look for opportunities to learn about things in the business, even if they're not directly connected to your day-to-day work. Those were maybe the two best points.
I love this. I think that's a great call. And it goes back to one of your strategic priorities, right? Which is to how collaborating with ClinOps. It's becoming a partner and looking for opportunities we always think that the kind of most successful organizations are the ones where the finance or accounting person is proactively engaging ClinOps with questions. So I think that goes to your curiosity point, and makes a lot of sense. I know we're close to kind of the 45-minute mark. Any questions from folks on the phone? I know we have one person from Trevi. Any hard questions for your CFO? Okay, then let's see if we can, letting you off easy today, as she said.
Thanks, Jordan.
Well, Lisa, I really appreciate the time spending with Auxilius. I certainly love the discussion. Well, we have questions. Okay, so let me not wrap us. Okay, Lydia, question: how do you work with IR and PR in your function?
So IR actually reports to me. PR, so we don't. I guess we do. We have communications. We don't really call it PR per se. So yeah, IR is how we sort of go about the investor targeting. We're always reviewing the latest analyst reports that have come out on us and determining whether, are they hearing the messaging right, and sort of, telegraphing it out the way, that we think it should be. If not, how do we have to tweak our message to be able to, to make sure that they're getting it in the way we intend them to get it, right? So I would say that's sort of the biggest. IR. PR, I'm just thinking they do a lot of the drafting of the non-financial sections of our press releases and our external communications, our corporate deck, all that kind of stuff. And we, as the whole executive team, really reviews all of that, right? Our chief commercial officer, our chief development officer, our chief executive officer, myself, we're all reviewing all the content that our PR team, it actually rolls up under our chief commercial officer, but all that they put together, we're reviewing and each sort of guiding the PR team on our respective functional areas, right? Like I'm sort of guiding them on the financial areas of our publications, and our chief development officer on the conduct and results of the trials, and our chief commercial officer on the commercial opportunity, and the reimbursement opportunity once we get approved, and our CEO on sort of the whole strategic picture. So that's how I work with our PR department, our communications department.
And I think just a follow-up question to that, and I think it makes a lot of sense. In terms of, it sounds like you have in-house IR, and then comms is probably split. What are you outsourcing on the IR PR front?
I mean, obviously we outsource just like posting things on, PR Newswire and all that kind of stuff. We do use a IR firm. And I would say we use them mostly for a couple of, significant things. One is planning around our attendance at the JP Morgan conference. I mentioned we don't go to the actual JP Morgan conference. We go to a conference at the JP Morgan conference that's run by our IR firm. That's phenomenal. It's a really, really well-run conference, and they partner with us on all that sort of investor targeting and helping us arrange the meetings and all that kind of stuff. So we use them for that. We have them review certain of our communications, although we found that we have really, really good in-house communications people, and they are able to sort of do most of the heavy lifting themselves. Our IR firm also introduces us to, they have relationships with a bunch of funds and high net worth and retail investors. So they introduce us and arrange meetings for investors within their network. So those are some of the things we outsource.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. This is a great question. How is Trevi thinking about commercialization of your current clinical therapies? Is there a built-out business development team, and what does that structure look like at Trevi?
So there is not a built-out business development team, a fully built-out business development team, or commercial team, I should say. We do have a chief commercial officer, and that is he has a plan, and we have a strategy. We have articulated a strategy that allows us to go it alone. Our indications are, there are larger markets for our indications that could be sort of serviced by like GPs, but we can also take an approach with the drug that we're working on, that we can target specialty pulmonologists that treat patients with idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis and other types of fibrosis, as well as, we're also working on a drug that helps with refractory chronic cough, but by being third line therapy, we can just focus on specialty pulmonologists and allergists. So that creates a pretty small population of physicians that we would be prescribing our drug. So we have a strategy to be able to tackle that with a 30 to 40 person sales force. So he has a plan to build all that out, but like I mentioned, we're still about 2 years away. So I would say like in the next 12 months is when that really, really would start to ramp up.
That makes sense. And then I will end, if there's no one else, with the Auxilius specific question. Do you use Auxilius to forecast clinical expenses?
We do, 100%. I mentioned before, we have a feed from Auxilius in our Cube financial planning and analysis tool. So yes, and I would say that is one of the big advantages of Auxilius, because we used to do it with a much more sort of high level approach, and this enables us to have more precise future estimates.
Great. Yeah, and I'll just since that was an Auxilius specific question, I will just put a point on that, which is in general, what we've seen, and the reason we built the forecasting capabilities in Auxilius, is that the industry agnostic tools are great. The Cubes of the world are awesome, but they don't have the clinical specific capabilities. And so much of the forecasting for clinical expenses is around your patient enrollment and your site activation and the timeline that's specific to your study. And so that's really what I think Trevi appreciates about the Auxilius forecasting. And it actually is why we work pretty well with those kind of industry agnostic accounting and finance tools. Awesome. Okay. Well, those are great questions. Thanks, everybody. I think with that, we'll wrap for the day. Lisa, thanks again for the time. Congratulations on a good year. And it's always a pleasure to talk with you.
Yes, very nice to talk with you guys as well. And thank you for all the help.
Awesome. Okay. Talk soon. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everybody. Bye.